Welcome back home, Pastor Wright.
It's good to be.
It's such an honor to have you here today. We are delighted just to have you share with us your unique involvement during the segregation era. So, Pastor, tell us the story. Tell us about segregation. Tell us about the Black History Movement.
I'm going to begin, Donna, by giving a little bit of my background. I grew up in kind of a Mayberry situation, a little small town in southwestern Ohio. My neighbors were my family. It was an all-white community, and my family were the only people of color in the community. Because of the way they accepted us and we blended with them, then basically I grew up with an unreal view of the racial situation. At the school I went to, I was one of the best students. I was the fastest runner in track. There was nothing that made me feel inferior to anyone. So I wasn't exposed to the Southern situation until my summer after I graduated from high school. And I went to North Carolina, Winston-Salem, and worked in a tent meeting with Elder Malcolm Phipps. When the plane landed, Piedmont plane, flew out of Cincinnati, Ohio, was my first exposure to being really black in a white world. The way people looked at me, signs that said white and colored, and the way I was glared at when I went on and drank at the white fountain.
Goodness.
Elder Phipps picked me up, took me to where I was going to be staying, and began to share with me, giving me warnings of how I should act. That was my first exposure. Went through that summer, successful time, came on back home. The next year, I went south again. This time to work with my cousin James Thomas in Portsmouth, Virginia. Got caught one day going too fast trying to get to the tent where I was working. And the way that white policeman talked to me again reminded me. But now I'm beginning to build a picture. Because when I went to Oakwood as a freshman, the Greyhound bus took us to Nashville. Greyhound would not go to Huntsville because Greyhound did not believe in making black people sit in the back. So we had to leave the Greyhound station and go to the Trailway station, where the driver informed us as we got on the bus where we should sit.
Have mercy.
Now I'm sitting there seeming as a young black boy from Ohio with the temperament that I have.
We know.
And I'm saying to myself, I'm not liking this. We get off the bus in Huntsville. I'm a freshman. I'm beginning to hear about people like Martin Luther King and things like this. The movement was just getting going. This is now the fall of 1960. King was beginning to become more of a notable person. So they wanted to have a race or rally or drive there at the State College, Alabama A&M. The governor wouldn't let it happen because it was state property. So the movement appealed to Oakwood College. We were a parochial school, separation of church and state. Would you host it? Paul Monk was the president of the student body, and by then I'd been elected president of the freshman class. And we went to our president, college president, asked him, he was hesitant, because Oakwood was known to stay in its place in those years. And lo and behold, the president of the college said yes. I'll never forget that night.
Amen.
King, Y.T. Walker, Jesse Jackson, all those luminaries in the Oakwood College gym. And I sang with the Aeolians. We sang that night. And I heard for the first time the Dr. Martin Luther King. And a fire was set in my soul. After that event, there began to be some movement on our campus amongst faculty and students to be to make some changes, to do some things. Unfortunately, my first exposure to challenging racism in Huntsville, Alabama, was with the white Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Have mercy.
We went there because the Southern University was having a concert, the choir. So we went to hear our fellow young Adventists sing. And were met at the door by a deacon telling us we could not go in. And that if we did go in, they wouldn't start the concert until we left. I didn't say much. I was stunned.
So you're saying that you were experiencing racism within our own Seventh-day Adventist church.
And an issue, Donna, if I had not been a dyed-in-the-wool, Bible-taught Seventh-day Adventist, growing up around Seventh-day Adventists, grandparents and uncles and aunts and parents, it probably would have shaken me, but there's nothing that can shake me from this church because I understand the church to be what it is, a hospital. All of us in different degrees of wellness. And so though that night disturbed me, I said, my goodness, this is really something. Some of the faculty from Oakwood went down to the church, returned away the same way. So some of my early experiences in the South with the movement and racism were in the church. But I've heard King now that this fire has been set. And over the next 4 years, I was freshman class president, then I was on the student council, then I was vice president for social activities. I was student body president my senior year. In the meantime, you've had the March on Washington, and then the assassination of JFK. This is in the fall of '63. I get picked up by South Central Conference. All my buddies tell me, you're going to wind up in Mississippi. And I did. You stick a northern boy like me in a place like Mississippi, and there's only going to be sparks. The first mistake I made, I didn't consider it was a mistake. I refused to go in the back door of the hospital to visit my members.
You're bold, Pastor.
I went in the front door. And my first elder heard about it because he's a dyed-in-the-wool Mississippian. He panics, gets upset, it causes him trouble, so forth and so on. And I have no intention of backing down and backing away from the experience that I was having. So my first elder in Greenville, Mississippi, was a pretty important man in the church. He contacts the union president of Southern Union. I mean, I called the man's name, but he was of German descent. He comes all the way to the little church I'm pastoring in Greenville to put me in my place.
Dear God.
But my conference president was C.E. Dudley, a man of great courage, and he stood up for his young pastor. This resistance to the rules stayed with me. I wouldn't go to colored drinking fountains. I wouldn't do any of that. I wasn't going to do that. And when they later moved me to Jackson, Mississippi, I made sure that my now precious pregnant wife would be delivered in a hospital where they did not make the colored pregnant women be in a certain ward. And so I went to the Catholic hospital, St. Dominic. That's where Hank was born. But even in Jackson, when I would visit the Baptist hospital, colored pastors went in the back door. No, sir. I'm not doing that. So I developed a quiet resistance. In the meantime, going back now to when I was still starting my ministry, I had the chance to march with Martin Luther King, James Meredith, Jesse Jackson, Stokely Carmichael, in the Meredith March. I was in that march. I tried to find the pictures. The news camera caught us marching in the front of the line. Me, Pastor Joseph, Pastor Winborn, all of us marching in the front of the line. But I can't find the
We would
picture.
love to have those.
Yeah, I can't find it. I looked. I wanted to show them off today. Couldn't find it. So by then I was involved, but kept from time to time being confronted with the racism in our church. I'll tell you very frankly, now as a retired Adventist pastor, if there is a struggle I have, is that this church has never been willing to lead. See, it's all right to say to young black people that our focus is on the mission of the church. Well, what does that mean? The mission of the church does not include social justice? Help me with that. So I feel like sometimes our brethren have hid beneath the veil of the gospel while excluding key principles of the gospel. When certain things happen, you never hear any statement coming from us. Now, I don't want to be rough on us. You don't hear it necessarily coming from the Catholic Church or the Baptist Church either, particularly Southern Baptist, Lord have mercy. But it seems to me that the church, whose mission is to prepare the world for the soon coming of its Creator, would be a bit more intentioned, not in getting political, but in making statements of Christian principle at certain key times.
Pastor, you talk about the church. Did you see God's intervention? How did you see God's hands during this period?
Well, certainly we've seen progress in the church. For instance, when I first went to Mississippi, there was an academy there called Bass Memorial Academy. This is 1965. Well, they still had on their organizational charter, no black students. A Seventh-day Adventist Academy. A Seventh-day Adventist Academy. Well, that has changed. When we and my brother first applied to go to Mount Vernon Academy in Ohio, my parents received a letter saying that no black student had ever graduated from Mount Vernon. This is Ohio. But that has changed. And I could go on and on.
Yeah.
So there's been changes throughout. Robert Worley, in his book, A Gathering of Strangers, makes a very interesting statement, Donna. He says, the church has always been and will always be a reflection of the society out of which it gets its members. So, yeah, we would be naive to think we don't have racists in our church.
Truth.
The gospel does not necessarily take liquor, the taste of liquor, out of a newly baptized Adventist who drank liquor, or tobacco off the taste of tobacco on the tongue from a newly baptized member, and they struggle. So there are people in the church who struggle.
Yeah.
I'll be very frank. We have MAGAs in the church. Okay? But that doesn't mean the church ever gives in, gives over, sanctions. We stand for the gospel. John, the 17th chapter, Father, I want them to be one, even as you and I are one. And then he makes the key statement in chapter 20 and verse 21, John 17, and then goes back and says it again in verse 23, that the world may know that you have loved them and sent me. So the lack of racial tensions, racial practices, racial attitudes in the Adventist church are to be proof when people come to our church. There's something different going on here.
Mercy. I'm going to take you back, Pastor, to the South for just a bit. Mississippi, where you lived, places where you lived with your family. Were you or any of your family members harassed or arrested?
The Lord put that question in your heads. So I had it in my notes. In May of 1970, there was a anti-racism demonstration on the campus of Jackson State. The governor sent highway patrolmen to that campus, and those highway patrolmen shot into the girls' dorm. You can Google this. The event is there. At that time, I had charge of the welfare van owned by the South Central Conference. It had a big red light on top, and we did stuff when people had various crises. We would go and give service. It happened to be in my care at that time in Jackson. So they asked us to lead the march that took place in Jackson. That's when I first met Reverend Abernathy. Jesse Jackson, again, he would sit in that van right behind me. By then, Martin Luther King had been killed for a year. He was dead. He was killed in 1969. We led that march. That night, a phone call came to my home, threatening me, my wife, and my precious little son.
Mercy. My God.
It's so hard to talk about it.
Yes. I can imagine.
And Dr. Joseph, who passed just last year, who was one of my mentors, lived right up the street. And he told me, he said, look, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. But I was nervous. Never got another call. Nothing ever happened. But that was a moment of reality. The fact that they knew my name and knew my number.
Pastor Wright, you are a living, walking Black history. You're sharing information with us today that is not in the textbook, that we've never heard about. What would you tell today's generation, these young people? What would you share with them as they pursue, racial justice?
3 words: vote, vote, vote. Now, why do I say that? See, I know some of the people who went to jail, who suffered, who were beaten for this right. It disturbs me when I hear young African Americans talk lightly about the importance of voting. See, the United States of America is a democracy, not a theocracy. And there's only one powerful thing, listen to me, there's only one powerful thing that an American citizen does: vote.
Wow. Thank you for that.
And so when I see people taking that lightly, particularly grown-ups, let alone young people, it gets to me because they have no idea that is the strongest thing that an American citizen does. And don't say your one vote doesn't count. It does count. Multiplied, it does count. We wouldn't have the leadership we have now if more people had voted. And I don't mind saying that. I don't apologize for saying it. So vote. But then number 2, recognize that opportunities that are laid out there for you were earned. The scholarships we now have were earned. The money that now goes to HBCUs was that was earned. People suffered for that to happen. People paid a price for that to happen. Don't take it lightly. The fact that you can walk across the street and not have to go to the other side because somebody else says, "What?" That was earned. The fact that you can buy a nice home now in any neighborhood, that was earned. Don't take that stuff lightly. And those of us who are in the church, I don't ever want to hear a young African-American Adventist talk about the church. I love the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm as patient in this hospital.
Yes.
And the heart patients have no right to talk about the cancer patients. They're both sick. So we have some folks sicker than others, but this is God's church with a special mission. And I wouldn't be a part of anything else but this church.
Pastor Wright,
I get passionate talking about it, I'm afraid.
I see that. This has been just an awesome chat together. I thank God that I was chosen to sit with you, to have you share the story. So we're at the end of our time. Is there anything else that you haven't covered that you'd like to share with us as we conclude the session?
Maybe I would just say that I see growth in my nation. I see growth in my church. So it keeps me positive. It's my nature to speak straight and strong, but it is not a reflection of a lack of love. I love being an American. I love being a Seventh-day Adventist. Yes, racism will be with us till Jesus comes the second time. Let me just say that.
It's unfortunate.
But I've seen too many hearts change. I've seen people that I thought wouldn't change. And because the Lord has allowed me to work in every level of this church, I've seen change. But here's the caution. We as black people, either Americans or Seventh-day Adventists, have to be cautious about developing separatist attitudes ourselves. See, there's a lot of black prejudice. And I think we excuse ourselves sometimes because of what they did to us. Sin is sin is sin is sin.
So true.
And God is not favoring
Race.
race or racism
Yes.
in any part of our society. We're taught to love. Yeah.